Okay, the second parsha, Im B'chukosai Telechu. If you walk in my statutes, again, we always differentiate what's a chok, what's a mishpat. Chok is a statute. A mishpat, laws are rational laws. That although they're divine, but we can relate to the necessity of those laws. A chok is a statute. We're not able to understand and relate why it must be that way. We accept it because Hashem says that's what you must do. If you walk in my statutes, and you retain my mitzvos. Shmira means you retain them, and you actualize them. You do them. Then take a look in Rashi. Maybe when we speak about the chukosai telechu, we're speaking about the observance of the mitzvos. Evidently, it's not that because it follows afterwards. And you keep my mitzvahs. Evidently, keeping my mitzvahs is not the chukim, or not the statutes which you should walk in. So what is the chukosai telechu? You should walk in my statutes. That you should toil in Torah. That is the statute. It's not enough to study Torah, because we speak about that lumaram maslasos. We study. You can't actualize the mitzvah unless you know about it. The Gemara tells us in Kedushin, Godel Talmud Talmud maybe the Maser. Great is the study of Torah, because when you study it, that puts you in a position you're able actually to actualize it. So we know study is the prerequisite for the observance. So what does it mean? That's the chok. The chok is you have to be omel. You have to toil in Torah. That prerequisite to be that you should be impacted by Torah, that's a chok. It's not enough to know it. It's not enough to study it casually, but you have to toil for it. When you toil, when you study it. This is the Gemara in Megillah. The Gemara says, Yogata motzos etamin. We've mentioned the Gemara many times. That if somebody says to you, that how did he come upon the truth of Torah? Because he was Yogata, he toiled, you believe that person. If he says, Lo Yogati motzosi, I did not toil, and I came upon its truth, you don't believe that person. He may believe he's come upon truth, he's not there. And if a person says, Yogati v'lo motzosi, I've toiled and I did not come upon its truth, al tamin, you shouldn't believe that person. He, in his own mind, may believe that he toiled sufficiently, but the truth is he did not. And because he did not, that's why he did not come upon the truth of Torah. So there's a prerequisite to come upon the truth of Torah. That is the chok. You must toil. That's the opening statement in B'chukosai. V'tzimsosai tishmru. Now, this is important. When you study Torah, it's not only to toil in Torah to understand the Torah, it's with the intent, you're toiling in the Torah to be able to retain it and to fulfill it and to actualize it. You should study them, and then you will retain it, lasosam, to be able to actualize it, to fulfill the Torah. So the amelim is not, person is like enthralled with the intellectualism of Torah. Its breadth, its depth, and everything else. That's not sufficient. The reason why you're toiling, you have to have one component, one aspect of it is in mind. I'm toiling it to be able to be that devout Jew, to be able to worship God and serve Hashem at that special level. It's not just to be knowledgeable, it's be knowledgeable with an objective, with a purpose for retention, and retention for the sake of what? Of observance. That has to be the mindset, but it's all amelus. Why am I here? I'm here for that reason. That's why I'm investing all this ability. And that's why the whole concept of, at least, we read Pirkei Avos. Your Torah study should be primary, and your work should be secondary. What's primary? Primary that you give it your greatest effort. But if it's secondary, then there's no question you're not going to be omel. You're not going to toil in it, because if it's secondary, you toil in what's primary. But the Torah says, no, if you toil, it will come. You will have it. We'll see in a moment. But that's a chok. Why is that a chok? Now, we had mentioned the Medrash, Moshe Rabbeinu tells us, it's mentioned twice in the Torah, that when he was in Shamayim, receiving the Torah from Hashem, he tells us, Lechem lo chalti mayim lo shosisi. I did not eat bread, I did not drink water. Now, the question we always ask, what the Medrash asks, why is it important for us to know that Moshe, when he was studying the Torah from Hashem, he did not have any physical sustenance? No, not bread, which is the staple, and not water, which is the essence of life. And he mentions it twice. So the Medrash tells us what Moshe said to Klal Yisrael was, Kishem shemosarti domi v'chel bioleo. As when I studied Torah from Hashem, because he says he did not eat for 40 days and 40 nights when he studied Torah from Hashem. As I gave domi v'chelbi, my blood and my fat, I sacrificed for the sake of Torah, because he was physically minimized. As a result of this, if you want to acquire Torah, you must give that also, you must sacrifice. You must give of yourself and compromise yourself for the sake of Torah. And that's why he's sharing with us, now, we had said, who was Moshe Rabbeinu's teacher? HaKadosh Baruch Hu was Moshe Rabbeinu's teacher. He taught Moshe the Torah's entirety on the first day, and at the end of the day, he forgot it. It repeated itself 40 times. And finally, on the 40th day, he retained it, and that's when he gave him the first set of luchos, the first set of tablets, to come down. I mean, if he was able to teach it to him, communicate it on the first day in its entirety, as he retained it after 40 days, Hashem could have had it retain it after the first day. You study it, and then what? You retain it. Now, Moshe Rabbeinu probably was a pretty smart person. We find Moshe Rabbeinu, before he went to Shemayim to receive the Torah, he already what? 10 plagues. Kriyas Yamsuf. He did many things. His knowledge in that moment was broad and deep, not to be fathomed. But nevertheless, when he went to study the Torah, to receive Torah from Hashem, after the day, and he had a capacity, he taught him everything one day, which is miraculous. He forgot at the end of the day. And it repeats itself 40 times. What's the message? That although whatever your capacity is, whatever your intellectualism is, the only way you're able to retain Torah, if it's gifted to you. If Hashem gifts it to you, then you have it. If he doesn't gift it to you, regardless of your level of genius, to come upon its truth, that you need siyata d'shmaya. It's all divine. It's a divine gift, divine intervention. Then you're able to process it, fully grasp it, and come upon its truth. That was the message to Moshe. And simultaneously, so to be able to come upon the truth of Torah, now, the human faculty is what? That's the process information. But the human faculty to have the capacity to connect with this neshama, that you're able to come upon the truths of Torah, which is spiritual, and everything in Torah is purely symbolisms, to activate forces in the spiritual, as we spoke about Kedoshim Tiyu, that you have to win yourself a material, to have a relation with Hashem, Ki Kodesh Ani Hashem Elokechem, just as I'm holy, I have no relevance to the material. You have to win yourself from the material. You can't live as a hedonist, as a glutton, as an intellectual animal, but you only partake of the world as much as you need to be able to maintain yourself, only as a means, not as an end. Only then do we have a relationship. When you bring your level to that level of relationship, then you have a greater level relevance to truth, to the Torah itself. Because the Torah itself is what? There's famous Zohar. The Zohar says, Yisrael v'Raisum kuchrichu chadu. The Torah and Hashem and the Jewish people are all intertwined with one another. Meaning, what is the barrier between us? At Sinai, he took us as his people. What was the catalyst? What connected us to him? It was the Torah. But you can only be connected to him if you demonstrate and reflect his qualities. Mani kodesh avatemti kadoshim. As I'm holy, I'm divorced, removed from physicality. You must be. To what degree? As much as you have to be. You only partake of the material world only to facilitate the spiritual. More than that, that's called excess. So the closer to that, so that's sacrifice. But naturally, as human beings, we're inclined to partake of the material, to have one or more of the material. As a result of that, whenever you compromise the physical, that's called toiling. You're toiling for the sake of the spiritual. And that's why, and that's the prerequisite, it's a chok. If you toil in my Torah, when you toil, it's for the sake of retention and for the sake of actualization. Then you will merit bounty, unlimited bounty. Because we say, Yemen Kemach in Torah. If there's no Kemach, there's no Torah itself whatsoever. But we'll see over here, what Hashem gives us is beyond our needs, because there are many questions to ask. There's a portion in Dvorim, it's called Ekev. Ekev Tishmun. If you observe my mitzvos, like this and that, everything, there'll be unlimited blessings. Your animals will not miscarry. The bounty will be unlimited. Im Ekev Tishmun. So the famous Rashi, Im Ekev Tishmun, it could have says Im Tishmun. What's the word Ekev? Right? Ekev. So Rashi cites the Midrash. If you keep the mitzvahs she'odem dosh ba'kevov, if you even observe the mitzvahs that a person tramples on with his heels, meaning the mitzvahs that are neglected by most, you keep those mitzvahs, you're going to merit the ultimate. So we ask the question, why? Is it because if the mitzvah is being neglected, it's like the underdog, and God favors the underdog. Therefore, and you're attending to that, therefore you're worthy of this unlimited bracha, or no, it's for some other reason. So why does a person neglect the mitzvah? Mitzvah she'odem dosh ba'kevov. The mitzvah, the person, we're using that term, he tramples on. He doesn't give it any value. We just read in Pirkei Avos, have the exorb mitzvah kala kibachamura. You should be careful with a mitzvah kala as a more severe mitzvah. Have a rotzla mitzvah kala. You should pursue a mitzvah kala no less than mitzvah chabura. But why? Why do we pick and choose? What's more and what's less? We make these differentiations. The answer is because we have yardsticks. We have a spiritual yardstick. Is it worth my while or is it not worth my while? If I feel it's worth my while, then I do it. If it's not worth my while, then I'm not going to compromise myself. I'm not going to make the sacrifice. But if factually is the one who commanded you is Hashem, it makes no difference if it's a mitzvah kal, mitzvah chamura. You have to do the will of God. If you focus on yourself, then we start pulling out our yardstick and measuring and putting it on the scale. Is it worth my while? Not worth my while. But if it's the Dvar Hashem, it's because it's God's dictate. What difference does it make? Mitzvah kal, mitzvah chamura. So the person who observes the mitzvah that's neglected, why is he observing it? Why is he different than most? Because most people, their focus is it worth my while? Even if it doesn't lishma, but coupled with lishma, it's that self-interest. But if a person doesn't have that self-interest, it's purely to do the will of Hashem, then there's no difference between mitzvah kal, mitzvah chamura. And therefore, when you observe even the mitzvahs that are neglected by others, what do you merit? You merit everything. Because that's the most advanced level of observance. When you do it for the sake of Hashem himself, then you're worthy to receive unlimited bounty for that reason. So similarly here, if you toil in Torah and you compromise your physicality, all the material needs which are natural, amenities of life, for the sake of Torah, what does that say? What's the primary? Why are you doing it? Because it shows to what degree you're esteeming and valuing Hashem to do his will, it's worth everything in the world. Therefore, you merit this unlimited bounty, which we're about to speak about. Good. What do you see?
Rabbi, in terms of toiling in Torah, when we speak about it, there's aspects of Torah that don't really have so much relevance to us, like karbanos and whatnot, and learning them. How does that translate to actually doing it, or specific subjects of Torah?
The Nodeb Yehuda, who was the chief rabbi of Prague in the 1700s, he was known as the posek. He was the leading decider of the world. And he has 2 volumes of responsa. It's called Chuvas Nodeb Yehuda. But usually a person who was a posek, he wasn't a commentator. He didn't write his novelty on Shas, but he did. And there's a commentary on Shas, on many tractates, Masechtos. It's called Slach. It's an acronym, Tzil L'Nefesh Chaya. And the first volume is on Masechtos Brachos. And he writes in the introduction to Masechtos Brachos, he writes, there are many agadatos in the Gemara. We learn agadic works, that some of them are so esoteric. It touches upon things we speak about, angels, what an angel represents, what's the distance from one world to the other world, all these things. It's beyond our grasp. We don't understand these things. Moshe understood it. The Tanoim, Rabbi Kiva understood it. But we don't understand, but we study it. What do we study it? But yet, it's part of Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral law. We have to study it. Why? And we study it to our best ability. To retain, to try to understand it to our best ability. Why do we study it? So he explains it with an allegory. There was an older man and a young boy that was shipwrecked on an island. And the older man, who was very learned, very knowledgeable, he says to the younger boy, who doesn't even know how to read and write, knows very little, he says, look, probably by the time we're going to be found, it could be 30 years from now. By that time, I will no longer be alive. But you're a young boy now. When you'll be found, you'll be at the beginning, still at the beginning of your life. I will teach you all the rudiments of life, all the skills, writing, math, commerce, to know everything about the world. Why? Because when you'll be discovered, you'll be able to immediately be integrated into society and be fully functional. So I will teach you everything now. So when you will be found, you'll immediately be a functional person to be able to be productive in many ways. So Rabbi Yehuda says, in this world, a person has limitations. As much as we know, we have limitations. When the neshama leaves this world and goes to the world to come, it's called Yeshiv Shamalo, you go to Olam Haba, there are many things we have relevance to understand, which we can't understand in this world. So whatever we study in this world to our best ability, when we come to world to come, all of a sudden, whatever that represents, symbolism-wise, otherwise, vistas are open, and immediately we begin understanding what we didn't understand. Because we no longer have all the obstructions and the limitations of being a physical person. Therefore, that's our obligation to study to our best ability, whatever is available, and whatever we merit, whatever we come upon. Beyond that point, you're not able to come upon it. But when we arrive in the world to come, then we will come upon the truths and keep advancing based on the degree that you invested in this world, and that will be your potential and to what degree you will succeed in the world to come based on what you studied. So the karbonos is part of Torah. You have to study it to your best ability. How it activates, we're not Ramchal. Ramchal was a Kabbalist. As much as we study Ramchal, whatever we understand is literally infinitesimal compared to what he understood. And what he understood was not what Reb Shimon Yochai understood. And each one of them understood what previous ones did not understand. Nevertheless, but whatever your capacity is to understand, even though it's within limitation, when we go beyond that, then we have an understanding of whatever that represents. And we're able to continuously advance on that trajectory to keep going. But that you have to imchusateilechu. You toil because you want to come upon its truths. Whatever you merit, you merit. What you don't merit, you don't merit. But there's not even a consideration. Come upon its truths and to retain it, and to merit whatever you're supposed to merit, unless you toil when you study that Torah. On that. In life, as I always say, everything is based on merit. You only come up, the Torah is one entity. Whether you're learning Moed, the laws which pertain to Yom Tovim, time, you're learning Nizikin, torts, you're learning Noshin, the laws which pertain to marriage, divorce, contracts, whether you're learning Zroim, whether you're learning Kachim, sacrifices, whatever relates to the Beis HaMikdash, it's all one Torah. It's all interconnected. It all is part of our spirituality. It's the spiritual infrastructure. To be able to merit the insight and the understanding of one, you have to understand it all. So each one complements the other one. Why did I come upon the schus? Why do I have the merit to be able to merit that divine understanding that God is willing to give me that insight? There's a story I once heard. What is Amelus? What is Amelus? I heard this Rabbi Gifter, Zechariah Nevrachos, that tells Rosh Shivi. In Europe, they would say this over the Nitziv. Rabbi Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin was Rosh Shivi in Volozhin. And he authored many, many works on Shas. And he was married. His wife was the granddaughter of Rav Chaim Volozhin. That's who his wife was. And at about 2, 3 in the morning, he would come into the Beis Medrash. It was known because Rav Chaim Volozhin writes in Nefesh HaChaim that if the world should cease being the study of Torah even for a moment, the world will revert back to pre-existence. It's based on the pasuk in Lo Brisi Yom V'Loilo Chok Shmayim Ortzel Samti. If not for my covenant being in effect day and night, the extent of the world, heaven and earth, would not exist. That's famous for Chaim Volozhin. So in Volozhin, it was known they had 3 shifts. There was never a moment that there was not a minion of students studying Torah in Volozhin. Every moment of the day, there were 10 people studying Torah. Based on that, the Chofetz Chaim, in one of his works, cites a Zohar. It's a Zohar. Rav Chaim Volozhin writes there, it's based on a Zohar. The Torah has to be in effect continuously. See, he had a custom. He would come to the Beis Medrash 2, 3 in the morning and pace up and down. And there was always minimally 10 people studying. And he sees there's a student studying Bava Basra. And he looks over his shoulder to see exactly what page he's at. And he asks the student on a certain Tosas there on that page, he says, did you have difficulty studying that Tosas? Do you have any? He says, yeah. He says, I've been working on it for weeks and I have this difficulty and that difficulty. So then the Tziv says to him, he was already an old man. He says, that Tosas I worked on for 25 years to try to understand. And he says, and even after that, I wasn't able quite to get a full understanding of that. I fasted endless fasts. I prayed to Hashem that he should open my eyes and give me some level of illumination to be able to understand that Tosas. Didn't help. I went to the cemetery and I prostrated myself on Kivri Tzadikim. And I prayed to Hashem in the merit of the Tzadikim, Hashem should give me the ability to come upon its truth. And finally, after all that, I came upon its truth. Understand? So what's Amelus B'Torah? What's toiling? I gave it 3 hours. I gave it 5 hours. I've been working on it for 3 days. The Tzibs tells you it had the value in his eyes to that degree. 25 years he worked on it. And what did he do? Did he just apply his mind? You see from the works he wrote, he authored, he had a proficiency in the Torah on many levels. There was nothing he didn't know, but yet he toiled. What's his toil? That's considered toiling for Torah. Not to leave a stone unturned. So the question is, as Mark is asking, why is it referred to as a statute and not a rational law? It should be a mishpat. As we said, when Moshe was receiving the Torah, being taught by Hashem, the Torah, as he retained it the first day, he could retain it, understood it the first day, was taught Torah's time the first day, he could retain it at the end of the first day. But yet, he wasn't able to retain it. And it had to repeat itself 40 times. And finally, why did he retain it? Only because God allowed him to retain it. That's it. Does that make sense? Doesn't make sense. Because if you understand, look, every chok, every statute has a reason. Shlomo Melech understood every statute because he was the wisest man who ever lived. But one statute he didn't understand was Porat Numa. That's that statute he didn't understand. So there is an understanding. Statute means as a rational person, we don't understand why. Why do you have to continuously study unceasingly to be able to retain it, to be able to come upon its truth? Why do you have to toil? So that there's this continuous toiling, and that's the statute. I'm a pretty smart guy, and we're talking, it's more than retention. A person can have instantaneous recollection, full retention. It's not the same thing. You know, sometimes when you live something, you breathe it, and it's always in your mind continuously. There's no level of detachment. It's a different level of integration in your being, and we understand that. But even that, but why just keep going every moment of your life? I once mentioned, and the Or Chaim Kodesh touches upon this. The Chazal tell us when Moshe broke the first luchos, it says that the letters were etched on the stone. They were letters of fire. When he smashed the luchos, the letters floated heavenward. What was the symbolism of the letters floating upward? That was Shikras HaTorah. That meant the Jews are going to forget the Torah. If Moshe Rabbeinu wouldn't have broken the luchos, whatever we study, it becomes etched in our minds. We have no relevance to forgetting. But because he broke the luchos, therefore we forget. And therefore we have to study and study and study. Otherwise, we're going to forget. The Rambam writes in Hilchos Talmud Torah that a Jew has an obligation to study till the last moment of his life. Why? Because the moment you stop studying, the moment you stop, you begin forgetting. So the only way you can prevent forgetting, you have to continue to study. So when did that happen? When he broke the luchos. If he wouldn't have broken the luchos, whatever we studied is etched in our minds, on our neshama, we'll just keep adding. But because he broke the luchos, as a result of that, we have to continue the process. How do we understand it? So the way I explained it was this way. The Gemara tells us in Psachim that forgetting is a gift of life. Why? Because if a person loses a loved one, and you'd be able to retain and live that first moment of pain for the rest of your life at that level, you wouldn't survive it. You couldn't survive. So even though we remember the event, but the impact, exactly the way it touched us at that moment, it fades gradually over time. Even though you retain it, knowledge-wise, fact-wise, you retain it. It's not the same. So the forgetting is things start fading. Not that it's not as vivid, but it's more than that. It's like reliving that moment, the first moment, and relive it for the rest of your life. You couldn't survive. So why did God introduce forgetting it to forget? To be able to survive the event of death. If Adam wouldn't have sinned with the Eitz Hadas, death would have no relevance. There'd be no reason to forget. So forgetting was only introduced because the Eitz Hadas. If Klal Yisrael wouldn't have done the Egel at Sinai, the Gemara says, we reverted back to pre-sin of Adam, we would have lived eternally. It's only because of Chet of Egel, we reverted back to post-sin. The breaking of the luchos, Hashem says, Yashikocha Shishibarta. I want to thank you, you broke the luchos. Because if I wouldn't have, I would have had to destroy the Jewish people. So who would have been left? Moshe Rabbeinu would have been left. So then death would have had no relevance to them. But now that you're going to survive, in what context do you survive? Do you continue? Post-sin. Post-sin, you're subject to death. Once you're subject to death, you have to have forgetting. Because otherwise you couldn't survive it. Once you have forgetting, therefore you have to study to counter that shortcoming in a human being, because otherwise you're going to forget the Torah. Therefore, the obligation to study is continuous, because the forgetting was only as a result of the breaking of the luchos, and the symbolism of that is the fading process is when those letters floated upward and they disappeared.